Hi guys, it's Cindy Lynn with my Inkie Fingers. Thank you so much for joining me on my YouTube channel and blog today. I am so super excited to bring you this new series called Let's Case It, Let's Make It. Now, just a quick note, I am going to record my audio live as I make the card. My voiceover skills are not quite as good as my card making skills. So in an effort to make sure that I don't miss anything and that I really deliver a very good step-by-step tutorial, I'm going to talk to you live as I make the card. So with that being said, this series is dedicated to beginners, intermediate, advanced, whatever your skill level, there is something for everyone. If you are a beginner, and you're sitting there thinking, I don't know where to start, I don't have any supplies, I have very little supplies, you saw a card and you loved it and you want to recreate it, you might be intimidated, it seems too hard or too involved, you don't have the instruction. I mean, that's maybe why you're here watching this video, right? Whatever your fears are, lay them to rest here, because I'm going to show you how easy it is to look at any card and recreate it. If you're intermediate, maybe you're just looking to improve your skills, maybe just tweak your cards a little bit, learn some new techniques, or maybe you just enjoy casing, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're an advanced stamper, then I'm guessing maybe you just like my videos and want to play along, or maybe you're just looking for ideas on how to help your new stampers. Either way, there is something in this series for everyone. So let's talk about casing and what it is. Case, the word case, C-A-S-E, stands for copy and share everything. So casing is something that when someone cases one of my cards, it inspires me. It puts a pep in my step. So never be afraid to case someone's card. And if you do case them, please credit them and let them know. Send them a comment or tag them on the Facebook group, or comment on their YouTube or comment on their blog, wherever you may be. Trust me, it's going to make them feel good. So where do you go to find cards that you might want to case? You may want to get into stamping and you just have no idea where to start. The best place to start is in your actual catalog. So whether it be the main catalog, I mean, there's so many cards in here. It is just packed with different ideas and inspiration for you guys. So you can start there, or you can look at the mini catalog, and this is actually the inspiration for today's card. And this is also packed with just tons and tons of inspiration, as is the celebration catalog. So as you're watching along, don't forget, you can pause the video at any time, run and grab that supply that you need, take a quick break and come back to it. As you're playing along, you can case the card exactly as I make it, or you can put your own twist on it. You can change the stamps, you can change the colors. This is where you are going to learn how to master your card making skills. So without further ado, let's get into it. So as I said before, the inspiration for the first card in this series came from our January to June 2020 mini catalog that's also on my blog. You can flip through there. And this here is the card that I was inspired to make today. And I actually made one so that I could take a picture of it and put it up on screen for you guys as the video goes along. So I did make one. The first thing you're going to want to do is grab your cardstock. Now, we as demonstrators get supply lists, and I'll actually even show you. We get supply lists, and I've penciled and written stuff all over it. And before I printed the supply list, I actually grabbed a piece of our crumb cake paper, because in the picture, it looked like crumb cake to me. It wasn't crumb cake. It was, in fact, Sahara sand. But you know what? That's okay, because when we're casing, it's our card and we can do whatever we like. So I cut a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock in half at 5.5 inches, and then I scored it. The 4 1/4 mark, we're just going to score it. Now, when it comes to scoring, just use a very light touch at first, because the lighter you go, you can't ruin it, right? If you score too hard, you may perforate your paper, and you don't want to do that. So you're just going to fold it in half, and I'm going to use a bone folder just to give myself a nice crisp fold so the card lays flat and it doesn't lay open like this. And then I cut a second piece of the crumb cake. This one is 5 1/4 by 4 inches. And then I also cut 2 pieces of Whisper White cardstock the exact same size. And then I have one piece of black, Whisper Black. I have one piece of basic black and that's just a scrap. So we're going to start with one of our pieces of Whisper White cardstock, and we're going to pull out our painted poppies. Now, limited supplies. Don't worry with the Paper Pumpkin subscription, and if you don't have a Paper Pumpkin subscription, you should seriously consider it. You get a free block in your very first kit, and this block is good for every single Paper Pumpkin that will come after that. You will never get a stamp that will not fit on this. So I find this to be an absolute perfect size. So if you don't have an acrylic stamp, seriously consider the Paper Pumpkin, because the supplies that come in it create the most beautiful little kits, and it gives you step-by-step instruction. I normally post a video on things you can make with the kit that aren't necessarily on the instruction. But the nice thing is the supplies in it kind of intermingle, and I'm going to use some Paper Pumpkin supplies on this card, so you'll see how I did that later. So now we're going to pull out our StazOn. Now, the actual instruction sheet called for the thick, heavy Whisper White paper. I didn't have that, so we're going to go with it, right? Because I don't have every single thing in the catalog. Unfortunately, I wish I did, but I don't. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to pull out the other little flower, and I'm going to pull out, so these are the 4 stamps, the 2 flowers, and the 2 leaf sets. Those are the 4 I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to stamp them all right here on this actual piece of paper. So I'm going to do 2 large flowers, and I'm going to use our StazOn cleaner. Now, I happen to have an old bottle that I just keep pouring my StazOn cleaner into it, because it's kind of like a bingo dauber, and I just like the application. You don't have to use it this way. You can absolutely use the scrubby pad or just spray it on here, but you can see that it takes that StazOn off perfectly and your stamp looks brand new again. So I'm going to put this one away, pull out the next one, because as you can see on the card, I'll put it on screen, it's got 2 big flowers and 1 of the little flowers. So we're going to stamp all of those. Now, if you don't have the painted poppy set, just go to your stash and find some stamps that have some flowers in it. They don't even have to be the same size. They could be any size. Just kind of eyeball it and see what you think will look good. So we're going to stamp 2 of these. 1, 2, and then we're going to stamp 4 of these little leaves. And I kind of squished that one really, really, really hard down on the paper. So see, nobody's perfect. So I'm going to stamp an extra one. And I might even sneak 1 more in here for good measure. There we go. Now here's a very important tip. The StazOn is a very, very pigmented ink, and you're going to want to give this a moment to dry, because the Whisper White isn't a super porous paper like watercolor paper or the thick cardstock. So the ink is just kind of sitting there, and it takes a little bit to settle into the paper. So if you don't have a heat gun, then walk away and leave this for a good 10 minutes. If you have a heat gun, then go ahead and heat dry it. So now that this is dry, I'm going to grab some paper towel, and I do have the paper towel from the previous card I made, and we're going to grab our rich razzleberry, and I'm going to grab my aqua painter, and I'm also going to grab my Versamark, and I'm going to stick it under my lid, because we're going to have to leave the lid open, which houses the actual stamp pad, and I don't want my ink pad to bounce around. So the first thing we're going to do is, as you can see, I've got a lot of water in here. Now, just a quick tip. I don't know how many ink pads I have that I don't have re-inker in, but if you don't have the re-inker, and okay, so here's a brand new one, because I actually just replaced my pumpkin pie. I had the old one. This was the last one I needed to replace. If you don't have the re-inker, and you don't have a way to get your ink into the actual pan, all you have to do is, when it's closed, in the middle, you can feel it kind of gives. So put your thumbs where it says Stampin' Pad, and in the back, put your fingers in the middle, and you're just going to press, okay? Just press in and out, in and out. And don't worry, it won't break. And now when you open it, you've depressed the ink into the actual pan. So if you don't have the re-inkers to do your watercoloring, there's a good tip. I actually depressed this one. I haven't even used a re-inker. So what I'm going to do is, with my aqua painter, I'm just going to squish it until I get 1 or 2 droplets of water come out, and then I'm going to swish that around until I get the desired color I'm looking for. Now I'm going to grab a scratch piece of paper, and I'm actually going to use the other piece of Whisper White that we cut out. Now obviously I made 2 cards, so I have this piece that I cut my die out of, because I want to see what the color is going to do and how much water I have on my brush. So this is where having a scratch piece of paper is really important. So I'm going to lay this down, and I can already see, I'll put the picture of the card back up, that this is a little dark. Now, you know what? I've never really watercolored on regular paper, and I'm going to show you that it's not always going to be perfect. So this first one that I did, I wasn't happy with this. I did the flicking motion like this. So I just kind of flicked my watercolor onto the paper that way, and I didn't like that. So I'm going to show you how to get a nice smooth finish. And all you're going to do is just keep playing with this until you have the right consistency, and light is better. So this light right here is where I want to be. I've got my paper towel so I can kind of dab off a bit of that color. Now here's the key. You're going to want to make swirly motions, okay? Because if you make a swirly motion, as this watercolor sinks into the paper, you're going to get a nice soft finish like you see in the card. So I'm just going to come in, I'm going to tap that off a little bit, because if it's not quite dark enough, you can always go back later and add a little bit more. So I'm just putting some swirls in here, and I want them to be uneven. If you do a perfect circle, I mean, if the card was, I'm going to use this as an example, a perfect circle all the way around here, it just doesn't look natural anymore, right? Because each petal is its own. So as you're doing this, create a different dimension in each petal. So I'm just doing little swirls, and I'm going really soft. And then I'm thinking that the light is coming, let me put an arrow here for you guys. I'm going to think that the light is coming in from this direction. Let's put some little things there. So I want to create my shadows accordingly. And when it comes to coloring, if you have a colored image, it always helps to learn where the designer kind of thought the shadows were coming from. So don't be afraid to look at something that's already colored and go kind of copy what they did. So now I'm going to, now that you've got the idea for this one, I'm going to speed this up and color the rest. Depending on how much time I have for the video, I may just add music, or I may just cut it to where I've finished coloring these. Okay, so as you can see there, I've basically just laid down just a random amount of color just on the insides. So with the aqua painter brush, all you got to do is just give it a little squeeze and wipe it off. And as you can see, there's absolutely no color left on my paper, which I love. So I want to let that dry, because it is regular paper and not watercolor paper. The paper has a tendency to pill, warp, ripple, if you will. And I'm going to show you a way to fix that as well at the end when we're done all our coloring. So now we're going to go into our leaves, and we're just going to do the same thing that we did with the rich razzleberry. Yes, with the rich razzleberry. And we're going to create a nice soft green, and we're going to lay this down. And I like this color here. If you want it darker, just tap into where you've got your darker ink and mix it in some more. But I like this color. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughly, I want this a little bit darker actually. Now I've got it on my paper. I'm going to very roughly color this in. And if you look closely at the actual card that I completed, you can see there's some white spots, which is totally okay. Now, if you get too much water, bring in your paper towel and tap it and just pick up that water off of there. Or if you've got too much color, you can always come in and pick that up. And you can always tap off your brush as well. I don't feel like I have too much water. I'm just showing you that as a tip. So I'm going to color the rest of these up very lightly, remembering that if you put not enough color, you can always add some more color after. Unlike with watercolors, it's very difficult, almost impossible to lift this ink color off of regular paper, right? So less is more. Okay, now that we've got our green down on our leaves, we're going to give that a moment to dry and pull out our Blackberry Bliss. And again, same process. All we're going to do is drop 1 or 2 droplets. I usually do about 2. I find that gives me a good consistency. And you know what's great, guys? This dries, the water evaporates, and you're still left with all your pigment here in your pan. So this is fantastic. You don't waste any ink whatsoever. So I'm just kind of mixing in to see what color I'm going to get. And I'm going to wipe off my brush and I'm going to put it here on one of the colors that I already did. And I feel like that's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to take off some water, maybe add a little bit more here. And that's about the consistency I want. So as you can see, when I had a lot of water, it added a lot of ink, and I don't want that, right? I just want a nice light amount, and that looks good to me. So I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to start on the black, and then I'm just going to do that same motion, and I don't know if that's quite dark enough, so I may pick up a little bit more. The same motion, and I'm just going to kind of follow the line that I created, the line of light purple, and just kind of add a little bit below that to create some shading here. And I'm liking how this is looking. So I'll do this one, coming in from the black, adding a little bit more purple. Okay, and I'll speed this up just for time purposes. All right, so I'm liking how soft that looks, but what I want to do now, actually, we'll keep our Blackberry Bliss out, and I'm going to come into this really, really dark pigment here, and I'm just going to come and cover over this black area because I want the white spots that are left there in the black to be completely hidden. I don't want the white to show through. And on the original card that we're casing, the white did show through, but I'm going to choose to hide that. So there, that's all hidden. Now we're going to pull out the rich razzleberry again. And with that really light color, all I'm going to do is go over top of the dark and just kind of blend it out so that I'm getting a softer line all the way around the edge, because I want the flowers to kind of, if you can see here, my color is a little further out than it was on this one. So I'm just going to take this, start on the dark, make sure I don't have too much pigment, and then blend that out. Starting on the dark, and I'm just doing this in a really rough manner because I don't want it to look like a circle. I don't want it to be perfect, right? Okay, now one of the things I found that helped really, really well was to squish my aqua painter brush onto, sorry, that's my computer, onto the paper and just move that color all around each individual petal, because what I found is as this water sinks in and sinks into the paper, it helps that ink dry back a lot softer. And now my phone's going off. So all of this water is now going to dry back into that paper, and it's going to help the flowers kind of, the paint on the flowers kind of soften up a little bit. So now that we're done that, we're going to pull out our Mossy Meadow. And this here, it's okay to have a little bit of darker pigment here. So I'm only going to go in with 1 drop, and I'm going to pick up a lot of my darker pigment, mix this in, because this is the dark part of our leaves, right? So I like to come in with a nice dry aqua brush, and all I'm going to do is follow along the veining of the leaves, and then I'm going to put a little bit down at the bottom here where the leaf would have more shading. So again, just going in along the veining and then adding a little bit in here. Now when this dries back, I am going to go in a 3rd time when it's all dry, and I'm going to add a 3rd layer of this Mossy Meadow. Yes, of the Mossy Meadow. So now we're going to let this dry a little bit. because it's kind of wet, and you can kind of, I don't know if you can see here, but the paper, it did really, really well. Like, it's not completely flat. And honestly, I got something on my card, guys. I've got all this ink and I picked up my card and look what I did. That's just another reason to layer, right? I might actually, you know, I might actually just take this embellishment and put it up here, but we'll look at that after. Anyhow, so we're going to set this aside to dry. We're going to pull out our second piece of Whisper White and our Stitched Nested Labels dies. Now, if you don't have these dies, find something in your stash that works. I mean, it doesn't have to be this. It could be an oval, it could be a square, it could be a circle, it could be a shape. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to place that on my Whisper White, and I'm going to take it over to my Big Shot, and I'm going to cut that. Okay, now that that's cut out, I'm going to put it upside down on my workspace, because you know what's going to happen. I'm going to get ink on it. And now we're going to set that aside. Then we're going to pull out our crumb cake and our Poppy Moments dies. Now, the one that they use is this one here. I'll show you the picture. This one here in the Poppy Moments. But this die here, in the painted labels, it does coordinate with the actual painted poppies. You could use this one. You could use this nice big circle one. There's all kinds of different ways you can get this same effect here. But I am going to use the one from the actual card that we're casing, just for all intents and purposes. I cut this out of copy paper so I could actually see what the die was going to do. Now, as you can see in the card, I'll put my card up. It looks to me like this was placed somewhere right about here. So what I'm going to do is lay that there, and then I'm going to place my die as close underneath it as I can. And that looks about right to me. I want it to kind of come off the paper a little bit more. It didn't in the actual card that we're casing, but I want it to come off a little bit more on mine, because I'm not going to do it 3 times. I'm going to have it come off on this side and come off on this side. So I'm going to cut this on my Big Shot. There we go. And then I'm going to move it to the other side. And what I want here is I want a little bit to come off the side of the card here, but I want it to stay on the card here. I kind of want it to be the opposite of this, but a little bit more. So looking like right about there. So again, I'm going to put my die underneath it just so that I get a decent placement. And that looks about right. So I'm going to use a piece of my purple tape. I'm going to tape this on here, and I'm going to cut that. Okay, now that we've got that all out, we're going to do our splatter on here. And this is a simple process. You guys won't believe how easy this is. I'm going to bring out an extra piece of scratch paper. I'm going to bring out that same acrylic block that I got out of my paper pumpkin, and I'm going to pull out my Whisper White Stampin' Ink refill. And I'm going to put just about less than a pea size there, just a little blob. Aqua painter. Now I'm going to add 1 drop with my aqua painter here. There we 2 drops. Okay. 2 drops will work. Actually, 2 drops is probably better. And I'm going to mix that up. Now all I'm going to do, and you can grab a scratch piece of paper at this point just to kind of get the hang of it. Or if you've already done this, then just go for it, right? But all you're going to do is with this on the edge of your Stampin' Block, you're going to make a flick motion, and you're going to push your brush off with a relatively decent amount of pressure. So I'm just going to start flicking it. And don't worry if some of them are big blobs and some are little blobs, because you know what? When it's perfect, it's not homemade anymore, and you want to get kind of an organic feel here, right? So there we go. That's all there is to it. Look how pretty that is. Now we're going to do that exact same thing with the Blackberry Bliss on our flowers. So the leaves we'll set aside. We'll bring out our scratch paper. Now I have scratch paper, but I want it to stay clean for the video. That's why I'm not using it. Now here, you're going to want to use a lot of the darker pigment. So I'm going to pick up as much of this as I can and just gently wipe it on the edge of my brush. There we go. So I've got a decent amount of pigment. Now you don't need to necessarily add any water to here because there's already water in your pan. And you're just going to do the exact same motion that we did with the white. So now we're going to bring our leaves back in. And if you happen to have the painted labels dies, you're in luck because there are 2 dies that will cut the leaves out for you. If you don't, that's okay. You can fussy cut everything. There is no die for these ones. And this is a lot of fussy cutting here. And I don't really enjoy fussy cutting. So I'm going to cut these first because then the reward comes later, right? So when you're fussy cutting, what that means is you're just going to leave a little line, a white space, a white line, if you will, around the edge of your actual image. And I find that it helps if I move the paper, not my scissors. So my scissors stay in place. Okay, so I've gone and cut out all my leaves. And I did mention earlier that you can go back with your aqua painter once it, or that's not my aqua painter, with your aqua painter once it's dry and add more color, some darker hues with the Mossy Meadow, but I chose not to because I was pretty happy with where those leaves turned out. So I'm going to put those to the side. I did fussy cut out my flowers. Now they are a little bent because we wet our paper, right? So you can kind of use your fingers to straighten them out, or here's a really good tip. You can take your paper and you can iron it. And what I do is I iron it on the cotton setting with no water in my iron. And I use a piece of parchment paper and I put it over top and I iron it, and then I flip the paper upside down and I iron it. But you know what? I think that these are just so organic because they're kind of a little bit, they're not straight, you know? And on my card, which I fixed, by the way, I moved the little embellishment over. I actually turned up the little edges of my flowers here and my leaves because it just adds more dimension, right? So you don't want it to look like it was bought in a store. You want it to look homemade. And when someone knows that, they look at it and that they can see it's homemade, they're like, oh my God, did you make that? And that's the effect we're going for, right? I am going to come in with a Wink Estella. I know that they didn't do this on the card, but this is part of casing, right? When you come in and you kind of add your own twist to whatever card it is you're casing. And I really liked how these flowers looked when they had this little bit of sparkle on them. I'm going to take my black Stampin' Write marker and I'm just going to add, I don't know, you can't, it's hard to see, but I'm just going to add dots here to the actual inside of the poppy. I'll bring this up and hopefully it'll come into focus. But as you can see here, you can kind of see those black dots. I don't know how easy it is to see on video, but I can see them really good in person. Okay, I'm going to put those to the side. And for our last step, I'm going to use, now on the actual cased card, it said congratulations. I don't use a lot of congratulations cards. If you do, you do you and put a congratulations on it, but I don't send out a lot of congratulations. So I wanted to put thanks, because the nice thing about thanks is it could be thanks and on the inside for being such a good friend, thanks for mowing my lawn, whatever the case may be. Thanks works for so many different cards. So my go-to is thanks. And this here's a card set. If you're new to stamping, this has got you covered. I mean, I'm going to link it below. Definitely open it up and read all of these sentiments. It has got you covered for so many different occasions. This is definitely a great starter sentiment set. So I'm going to pull out the thanks, and I'm going to pull out my paper pumpkin block, and I'm going to pull out the Versamark. Now, actually, the first thing I want to do before I Versamark this is I want to use my Emboss Buddy, and I'm just going to pat this down. And as you can see, I get a lot of powder come out. And what this stuff does is it makes it so that your card doesn't have any static or anywhere other than the sticky Versamark for the embossing powder to stick to. So nothing will stick anywhere else other than where your embossing powder is. So now I'm going to take my white embossing powder, our Stampin' Up! Embossing powder, and I'm just going to put that on there. And I'm going to tap it off. And as you can see, now I've got my white embossing powder. Now I'm going to pull out my heat gun. Now in an effort to not warp my paper, I'm going to let my heat gun warm up before I start aiming it at my actual paper. Now I let this heat up for about a good 30 seconds, and I'm going to start by just kind of heating the back just to get the paper warm. and then the front, because if it bends one way, it's going to bend the opposite way. And as you can see, there it goes. I am going to pull out my stitched rectangle dies. If you don't have the stitched rectangle dies, that's totally okay. You can cut out your sentiment with ease if you have a T-square ruler. So just put it on a self-healing mat, put your T-square ruler in there, and you can use a craft knife and cut that up. So I do have the die, so I'm going to use that. Now, as you can see on my card, I had to think about where I wanted to place the thanks. So I wanted the thanks a little bit more so it was over top of the actual flowers. So I'm going to kind of use that as a guide. And I didn't stamp this straight. So this is the nice thing about having a die, is you can put your die on straight and it'll actually cut out straight. So I'm going to cut this on my Big Shot and pop it out, and there we have it. So pretty. I love it. Now we're going to start to assemble our card. Lay this down here on our card. And the nice thing about using the liquid glue is it's very forgiving, so you can reposition that, right? The next step is to adhere down our background. So there we go. So that's down now. I'm going to put some dimensionals on the backs of only the flowers. I want the leaves to lay flat, and I want the flowers to kind of pop a little bit off the card. I also put some foam strips on the back of the thanks, but because the thanks is going to go over top of the flowers, I didn't run the foam strips all the way because I only want to pop it up in the back here. Now here's a little tip. When you've got white foam on a black background, a black piece of paper, I like to take my Stampin' Write marker, whatever color your cardstock is. You can take the marker and you can just color this in to match. Probably don't need the inside too much, but these three sides to match the cardstock, because then when the card lays flat, or the recipient is inspecting it, they don't notice this white back there. And call me fussy, what have you. It's just something that I always do. So now the trick is, you've come this far and you've got all of your elements. And the trick is just laying them out in a way that pleases you. I mean, you don't have to follow the card exactly. As long as all of these pieces that you put in here now please you, that's all that matters. Because when you give this card to someone, you want to feel proud of it. You want to feel like it's, some of your best work. And they're going to sense that too, right? Because you're so proud of what you created. So I've got everything kind of laid out the way I want it. Here's another tip. These flowers all have that foam adhesive. So I'm going to put the leaves down first because I don't want to have to worry about tucking them in and running into those little foam dimensionals there underneath the flowers. So I've almost got this all done. And just a little quick tip, I only put the glue on the bottom parts of each element because I want to be able to curl my leaves up. So now I've got all of my release paper taken off of all of the backs of the flowers. And I'm just going to use my original card as a reference. And I'm going to pull out my tweezers and I'm going to just place these down in a way that reflects what I already did. And for you, it'll be reflecting the cased card, or you might be changing it up completely and you might be doing something totally different. And I hope you are. If you are, then that's fantastic, because it means that you're thinking outside of the box and you're kind of trying to make it your own. I decided to use the designer elements, and then I wanted something to match this gold. So these came in my paper pumpkin gift of fall. So I just keep these in a little container stash with all my leftover paper pumpkin, and they match perfectly. So I'm going to pull out one of my designer elements here. And I love these because there's gold, silver, and the copper or bronze, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go with the original design, and I'm going to put this one here. And these little guys, look at how dirty my hands are. These little guys are self-adhesive. So all you got to do is take your pick or any other pick that you have and pick that off. And then it's already glued. You don't even have to put glue down on your card. So simple. So there you have it. There's your finished card. Thank you so much for watching through to the end of the video. I hope that this video has helped you gain a little bit of confidence if you're a beginner stamper in your stamping, or if you're intermediate, I hope maybe you learned a couple tweaks. And for the advanced stampers, I hope that you took something away from the video. So until I see you again, take care and happy stamping. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye for now.